Hey guys, this is Adam with Mods for Quads,
Susan.
and today we're going to start lesson 1 of Autonomic Disreflexia and go over some of the science. It can be kind of complicated to really go into depth, but we're going to go over the main things that we want to remember and keep track of when we're considering some of the risk factors with autonomic dysreflexia. And I think Susan is going to brush up on some of the basics for us.
We both thought that it would be helpful for you to know a little bit of the science behind what happens to the body when you get autonomic dysreflexia. And because it can be life-threatening, it really is important to understand what's happening to you. So autonomic dysreflexia is the words that they kind of break down, kind of describe what's actually happening. So autonomic, we have the autonomic nervous system in our bodies. We have the central nervous system and the two branches off of that. The central nervous system is like our brain connected to our spinal cord all the way down our back. And we have the two branches, the somatic and the autonomic. Somatic deals with sensory, motor, touch, all of that. And the autonomic are kind of like all the automatic things that go on within our bodies, like our pupils open and dilate, our heart beats, our stomach digests food. What were the other ones?
Pupillary response, respiratory rate, digestion, heart rate.
So your lungs are kind of interesting because they can do it on their own, but you can also consciously control that. So anyway, we just wanted to let you know that this is a reaction of the body that is kind of out of your control. And because of that, and because it can be life-threatening, it's really important to understand what the heck is going on and what to do about it. So Adam's going to explain what it is. What is autonomic dysreflexia?
Autonomic dysreflexia is the result of nerve input in the body that is trying to reach the brain but is unable to do it because of some interruption along the spinal cord, especially a spinal cord injury or some other lesion or point of swelling that is impinging the spinal cord in a certain place. So that information is trying to make its way to the brain so that the brain can, delegate whatever the proper response is. But because it is interrupted, the body basically has a gross reaction to try to all but overcompensate for what's happening because the brain's not able to know the proper response. So it basically actuates your sympathetic nervous system. You have your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. Those are the two branches underneath. Those are the two parts of the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight response, which is usually excitatory in the body, raises your blood pressure, raises your heart rate, releases adrenaline, because your brain knows something is wrong, but it doesn't know what and doesn't know exactly how to respond. So it kind of turns all the systems on, assuming that you're, it's basically a survival reflex, the kind of thing your body would do if you thought you were dying or if your body sensed that, it was in danger.
I always remember that as your body is sympathizing that something really drastic is going on. So, and then the parasympathetic.
The parasympathetic is the opposite of the sympathetic. That's where the body, releases chemicals that calm you down, slow your heart rate.
That's what you're in when you're sleeping.
Relaxing your blood vessels, and autonomic dysreflexia. You're getting this really strong amount of input that's not making it to the brain to be properly decoded. So it's a gross overreaction. And what typically happens is below the level of injury. By the way, autonomic dysreflexia typically happens to people that are T6 and higher, not only quads, but down to T6. So it's going to present differently at different vertebrae levels, and also with different levels of severity and impairment. But as a rule of thumb, below the injury level, you're having a sympathetic response throughout your body below the injury level, and above the injury level, you're having usually a parasympathetic response, because above your injury level, your brain is doing the proper things to deal with the inputs that it's being given. So it knows to interact with the parasympathetic nervous system above the injury to relax the blood vessels, to it would otherwise try to lower your heart rate, but it's not able to do that if you're a T6 or above. So that's going to be vulnerable to the sympathetic nervous response. So a lot of times what's happening is, because of all the tension and the ramping up of blood pressure in your lower body, your lower body is getting more tense, creating higher blood pressure. The part of your body that's above your level of your injury is in a parasympathetic response, so it's relaxing everything. So what can easily happen is all the pressure from the lower pushing blood up into your brain, into your head and your neck, and those blood vessels are really relaxed, so more blood is able to go there, but it's not able to drain out properly, because all the circulatory system below the level of injury is constricted. So that's why autonomic dysreflexia can be so dangerous, because specifically you're getting a lot of pressure in your head, not just high blood pressure throughout your body. So it's not only your heart being at risk if you have really high blood pressure during AD, but also issues with your brain that can be very
So you could have a stroke.
Catastrophic. Yeah.
A stroke or brain damage, or
Yeah. So your blood pressure can spike. In my case, I have monitored my systolic blood pressure, and I knew that I was about to receive a stimulus around a wound that I had. Usually AD is a combination of things, unless there's one thing that's so loud that you have that reaction. Most commonly, it's a combination of things. Certainly for me, it's usually when 2 or 3 different things that have a very loud nerve input combined to get that.
So you're
that
meaning
override.
like a wound, an illness, and an allergy that you had to some food or something, like that trifecta kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. Bladder and bowel are probably the most common. Advanced constipation, UTI, a blocked catheter, especially those 2 at the same time, because usually there's a lot of pressure in your lower abdomen relative to your bladder and to your bowels, and sometimes they can antagonize each other. And then, say, maybe if you had a light wound on the bonier part of your pelvis in the back, then there's the possibility of having all those 3 things combined and setting off something that pushes you over into AD. And so, yeah, some of the things that can happen are stroke, heart attack, brain aneurysm, and it happens in a short period of time. Like I was saying, I monitor my own blood pressure. My systolic blood pressure went one day. I knew I was about to get AD, so I took my blood pressure. We introduced the stimulus that we knew was going to cause it. So I took my blood pressure, my systolic was 68. As soon as that pressure reading came up, I immediately cycled the blood pressure cuff again while we were, inputting the stimulus that was causing AD. And by the time that 90-second round, that second measurement came up, it was 249. So it went from 68 systolic to 249 systolic in 90 seconds. And, if you're dealing with, say you call 911 and you get the fire department or maybe even paramedics, or even going into the emergency room, depending on where you go, in the able-bodied community, if someone has a blood pressure of 145, that's on the upper end of normal. It's considered high, but it's not considered alarming. But if you're quadriplegic and your normal systolic blood pressure fluctuates from 90 to maybe 110, and all of a sudden you're up to 146, based on the time frame I gave you going from 68 to 249, you can see how 145 is already should be a point of concern, even though people typically aren't trained to evaluate it that way. So again, if you have first responders come to your house and they see your blood pressure is below 200, based on the way you treat an able-bodied patient,
They might think you're okay.
Usually you don't get overly concerned until it goes over 200. But if somebody is a quadriplegic and they're sitting around 180 and they're in a cycle of getting AD over and over again, perhaps you really want to identify it. We'll go over that method. We'll go over methods and management prevention in subsequent lessons. But with this, we want to go over the science, talk about kind of like how serious it is, why it's important to know about it, and just some of the fundamentals at work, so it's not too confusing to try to follow and find your own ways of approaching it.
So you would say, if you're quadriplegic, you definitely want to have a blood pressure monitor on hand. And then time-wise, like if you feel it happening, how much time do you have to rectify it?
So the amount of time you have is totally a function of whether or not you can do something about it, right? So if I get transferred from my chair to a park bench, like a hard bench, where my bony prominences are really digging in hard, I'm going to get very loud nerve input from that. And everything's going to tell me I need to move and reposition myself and get off of those sore spots. If I don't do anything about that, I haven't flirted with it recently to find out, but I've been in situations where even just being in a commode shower chair that's maybe more universal and isn't fit to me, just the wrong pressure in the wrong places can cause AD very quickly.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the lesson to leave everyone with is know what it is, notice if it's skyrocketing or if it's tanking, that it could be a mixed signal with your brain, and both can be dangerous. And we're going to give you more tips and tricks and all of the areas to know what might trigger it. But it sounds like if you have multiple things together, you may want to be on higher alert until you heal from a couple of those things, so that you don't get triggered.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that I did not mention yet is that in some ways, your blood pressure going up because of AD is probably most commonly the biggest risk, but AD can cause your blood pressure to tank, and so much so that your heart stops. So it can go either direction frankly. It can totally plummet, or it can totally skyrocket, and you have to address it in a timely manner. The more quickly you can address whatever is causing it, the greater your chances are of not having any dire consequences from that. And like I mentioned in the overview, I've had AD a lot more than 100 times at this point. I went through a rash of AD with the bad cushion that I had in my chair, and no one knew why I was getting AD, and I was able to kind of self-diagnose it intuitively, and over time validate that intuition when I did finally get a different cushion in my chair, and then all of a sudden the AD just vanished. But I had AD many times every day for months, 3 years ago now, and it's happened a lot of other times since my injury. But when it was happening, a dozen times a day, 20 times a day, and we're in the throes of it, it's like a lot of the little nuances start to we get used to it a little bit and start to craft our approach, and and thankfully living through it all. So hopefully we can give you guys some tools that maybe obviously you should find out as much as you can from your doctor about autonomic dysreflexia, both for your education and to double check and make sure they know something about it. Because if you come in later in the ER or an emergency situation, it's good for them to have an idea of what they can do. And there's other things that we use in real time with AD that you can actually go to your local fire department and consult those guys and show them what you use and tell them about it. So if they show up at your house and every second is
Gonna save your life potentially.
if it's coming down to seconds, you don't want to have to explain things to people when they show up to your house and your blood pressure is making your head feel like it's going to pop. So as much as you can do to set yourself up ahead of time, keeping things on you when you're out and about. But we'll talk more about management and prevention in subsequent lessons. But autonomic dysreflexia, it can make your blood pressure completely bottom out, or peak to a catastrophic level. So,
and basically the numbers for that too, from a scientific perspective, if the low blood pressure goes below 60 for a quadriplegic and above 100, those get to be in the danger zones. So start taking your blood pressure, taking a look at all your symptoms that you have, just to make sure that you're healthy, and when you're not, when you're super compromised, just make sure you have a caregiver around majority of the time.
The rule of thumb that I was given by my doctors at the spinal cord injury facility that I went to was basically, if your systolic blood pressure is 20 points higher than it normally is, then you should be on the lookout for AD and anything that might cause it. So we'll talk more about that in detail coming up here soon. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.